Hey everyone, it's Wingspan TT, and as I drive down the Pennsylvania Turnpike today, I wanted to take some time to talk about the CSM. That's the Council of Stellar Management in EVE Online. I know this is something that maybe some people were expecting me to do earlier, maybe nobody wanted that at all, and hey, if you don't care about this kind of stuff, feel free to let me know. There's no reason to make this kind of videos, but now that I've had a couple months, maybe 3 months proper of time acclimating to how things work within the CSM, I wanted to make a couple of videos to talk about what's going on in the CSM, what it is on the highest level, I guess, and kind of get some questions from you guys and to see if there's anything out there that I can do either to answer questions for you or to bring to CCP or the rest of the CSM. So today I wanted to do at a high level, like, what is the CSM? Because that's a question I get a lot, probably because a lot of people who started EVE Online, because of my videos, or got back in EVE Online, or were never really that engaged in it, we're never really engaged into a level that they would know what the CSM really is. And what it is, the Council of Stellar Management, is a council of 14 EVE players who are elected by the general EVE population to represent them in this kind of, I guess I call it the Space Senate. I would tell my friends, like, oh, I'm a space senator. You think you're dorky. I am a space senator. And that's essentially what it is. There are 14 seats. They're all relatively equal now. There used to be more differentiation between them. There also used to be different numbers of seats on the CSM. There are 2 permanent memberships that are people who are pretty much guaranteed to go to Iceland for these in-person summits, because twice a year there are in-person summits at CCP's headquarters in Reykjavik, where they bring people in, they bring the CSM, most of the CSM in, to talk about specific issues. Now, what I think a lot of people don't understand is that the CSM is not just those summits. Those summits are certainly important. Those are things that will be, major grounds for discussion and important things that affect EVE for a long time now and in the future. But there's also the day-to-day responsibilities of the CSM, which is kind of more invisible. And I think in the past, some people who have been kind of shat on by the EVE community for not being engaged in the CSM, it's very possible they were engaged in the day-to-day, and even if they couldn't personally make it to the summits, or for whatever reason the summits were on topics that weren't their domain, they were kind of looked down on. When I was running for CSM, at the time, people would say, okay, do you have 20 to 40 hours a week to dedicate to this? And I'm like, whoa, 20 to 40 hours a week, what does that have to do with going to these summits? And of course, the reality is it's because it's not about the summits. It's about the interaction that the CSM has with each other, with the other 13 members of the CSM, and with CCP as a game company every day. So what is that interaction? Well, the interaction is pretty straightforward. If I had to explain it at the top level, basically there are a couple different avenues that we all talk together on. The primary one is going to be Slack, at least what I view as the primary one is Slack. And there's a private CCP CSM Slack channel. And if you don't know what Slack is, it's kind of like this new wave productivity messaging app tool that's similar to IRC in some ways. It's similar to these various messaging programs like Skype and whatever, but it's really hot right now for lots of reasons. There is a general EVE Slack, and there's my corporation, Wingspan Delivery Services, uses Slack, but it's a very good tool for people to talk, to have conversations about specific topics, to talk one-on-one, and just to banter and stuff and throw ideas around. So pretty much every day, there's talk between the CSM and CCP on a variety of subjects in Slack. So there's different channels. There's one for like nullsec, lowsec, highsec. There's one for wormhole space. There's one for new structures. One's for ship balance, for aesthetics and skins and the way things look in the game, to lore, all stuff like that. And basically, whether it's CCP or the CSM, there's constantly discussions being started there and thrown around about things. So maybe that CCP Rise would come in and say, hey guys, we're looking at rebalancing missiles in a certain way. Here are some thoughts about it. What do you think at the top level? And it can be a very casual discussion. It'll just go like, maybe Rise in that instance would be gaining some top level, thoughts about like, oh, well, Wingspan, you use torpedoes a lot on stealth bombers. How do torpedoes feel? What do you think if we tweak them this way or that way? Blah, blah, blah. Hey, so-and-so, you know more about solo engagements and small stuff. You guys know about big fleet engagements. And basically just having a discussion at that level. And you could say, all right, well, what is the purpose of this, when they could always go to the community in the forums or on Reddit or stuff, and that certainly happens. But if, at the same time, there are discussions, I guess, that are a little bit more sensitive, or ideas that are really at such a high level that CCP wouldn't want to bring them to the general public and then kind of like get bitten if it blows up on them, or feel like it's a promise to the public. So if they can say to us, because we have a non-disclosure agreement, we're not supposed to say things that aren't public information about like the future plans of Eve, but if they said to us something like, hey guys, what do you think would happen if we made a series of pirate battleships, and the whole purpose of these new pirate battleships was to promote mining from battleships. I don't know, something like that, right? Well, maybe if they said that in the general public, if people really hated it, they'd be like, CCP is stupid, what a waste of time, these guys, I can't believe they would even suggest that, fuck these guys, blah, blah, blah. Or if people really loved the idea of mining battleships and said, oh my god, mining battleships, I can't wait, I'm gonna resub all my accounts to fly mining battleships, I'm training my battleship and mining skills to the max right now so I can fly these things. And then it's a year later, 2 years later, and this never comes out because the idea got scrapped because they didn't have the manpower to do it, or the budget to do it, or they did some balance stuff and they decided it was a bad idea. Either of those cases could blow up on them. So a lot of things they bring to the CSM could be top level dreamy things, or just in general things that they think that if it goes to the public without a little bit of testing the waters, it could have bad repercussions. Either letting people down or getting their hopes up and then letting them down, all kinds of things. And there may be things that may not be obvious. So for instance, there have been times where things have been brought to the CSM and they said, okay guys, how do you think that this change looks if we make this tweak to the ship? And maybe I'll say, looks good to me, I think that's what people want. And the other people on the CSM will say, hey, this works in low sec, this works in high sec, I think this will work in wormhole space, wherever. And then someone will say like, listen, actually this ship is very important to fleet doctrines that we have in my alliance, and if you make this change, it will kill a specific type of structure bashing or whatever, and no one in Eve does this except for us, or does it in a specific way. So in a lot of ways, that concern, if it was just, again, it could just be brought to the general public, right? But if it was, one of the first things that CCP would hear back in those feedback threads, wherever it is, it's on Twitter, it's on the forums, wherever, someone from that alliance might say, hey CCP, why do you hate my alliance? We use this all the time for this, and you're gonna fuck us on this. Whereas now that they've had that feedback internally, and hey, they could choose to ignore it, of course, but they at least know that exists ahead of time, because they can't know everything. There's tons and tons of players who play Eve, thousands, tens of thousands, and there's no way for them to know every possible use case scenario or the niche things people do or whatever. So that's just important. Of course, like I said, CCP can always ignore the things that we say, which is, it's funny, right? It's funny, and I know it's one of the sticking points that makes some of the other people on the CSM angry. I know there's specific CSM members who have this kind of grumbly attitude of like, what's reporting the CSM, they're not going to listen to us, we brought this to them over and over again, which, it definitely can feel bad. It feels bad when they come to you for feedback. So let's say the fleet warp changes, right? There were some ideas tossed around fleet warp changes, and I was like, I get what you're going for, and I understand these goals, but I really think what you should focus on is, addressing the specific, like if you want to nerf bombing runs, then nerf bombs, or nerf bombers, or something like that. If you want to nerf combat probing, then nerf probing, or the ships that people use for probing, or the accuracy of probes, or something like that. But if you just make these blanket changes to fleet warp, because people like fleet warping, it's like it's a beloved mechanic in general. It looks cool, it's fun to do. It's used in trailers and stuff. So to nerf it in any way feels like it feels bad, right? So that was one of like my top level feedback. And other people had similar feedback, and of course, I have to respect other people were for fleet warping even being completely removed from the game. But I can't get sour on the fact that, like, okay, they're not going to go my feedback, because there's lots of voices on the CSM. There's lots of voices, I'm sure, within CCP debating this stuff, and of course the general public and the perceptions there. So, and it's not like I have all the data or anyone on the CSM has all the data, and I don't even know if CCP has all the data. They definitely have more data points than I do, and ultimately they're the ones whose jobs get lost if they fuck up. So, if I were running my job, so like I'm a marketing and branding professional, and I ran some kind of, I brought something to some advisors, or had some kind of focus group, or reached out to a community and said, hey, what do you think of this? And one of them's like, don't do it. Okay, well, I have to understand the reasons why I said don't do it, but that doesn't mean that I necessarily won't do it. So I know I was getting off on a tangent there a little bit. I was talking about Slack originally. Slack is where a lot of the casual, everyday conversation goes. When I say every day, I mean every day. So like when I wake up in the morning, especially because they're in Europe and they're ahead of us, there's always a lot of conversation that's already started by CCP or the CSMs that are in, the Australian, Asian, and European time zones ahead of me. And you just got to play catch up and see what's going on. And people might be waiting on you, or there may be a discussion that you feel like you could have had a lot of impact on. Like, hey, they're talking about structures, but like one of the things for me is I see a lot of talk about structures, and I feel like a lot of the structure talk is at this very high level, extra large and large structure for big alliances, for super capitals and titans, and shooting doomsdays out of structures. But for new players, relatively new players, or for people who are in smaller corporations or corporations that aren't part of alliances, I'm very interested in what small and medium structures are going to be. So I'm always asking questions in that scope of like, how's it scale down like that? For me, that's like the number one thing. And then of course, like, how would these structures get used like semi-permanently for like nomadic groups or solo players who can't defend their structures very well, explorers who might be leaving their structures out in other people's space, that kind of thing. And of course, wormhole space, because wormhole space is something that, people elected Corbex to be like the wormhole space representative, and his knowledge of wormhole space is definitely like much greater than mine. It's more that, he's been playing the game longer, but he also has like, like this full circle generally of wormhole space life, whereas, I have this very specific niche of wormhole space, and me and my corporation do that thing very, very specific, but that's a niche. So I have perspectives on wormhole space, but it's kind of like, I guess like the him, like the 80% of him, and like the 15% to me, and 5% of the rest of the people, if they're not really wormhole people, to kind of keep those issues on the table. Especially things like structures when they're being designed. I don't think that it's very easy to not put that kind of stuff first, because everyone is thinking of structures as these kind of the way that people think of stations and outposts and stuff right now. So it's important to keep both of those perspectives on the table. So again, I went on another tangent about the other communication. So in addition to the casual conversations that we have on Slack all the time on the CSM, there's also more formal communications on Confluent. Confluence is basically like a Wikipedia-like website where people, where CSM and CCP, but primarily for the most part it's CCP, is posting things that are much farther down the line. So when you guys see dev logs or balance changes or deciding what's going to be in a patch or anything like that, those kinds of notes or those ideas that are getting very much farther along, once they're outside the nebulous realm of dreamland, they're brought into Confluence, they're put on their own pages, and then from there, there's more constructive, discussion in the sense of, all right, let's get down to particulars. Let's look at, okay, how many hit points does this ship have, or exactly what skins are going to be available, or what is the pricing going to be on skins, or when are these sob changes going to be rolled out? Like those kinds of things are brought into Confluence, and that's kind of when I say it's more less casual, what I just mean is because it's not a chat room essentially, it's like people have time to think about it, to go home and ask them questions with like their corporation. Maybe they'll go in Excel, toy around in Excel a little bit, or literally, like I said, just think about it, let it stew a bit and then compose a more constructive response. So, in Slack, it'll be very much like, oh, please don't do this, this sucks, or have you thought about this? But in Confluence, that's where like people will sit down and write like paragraphs and really like chew into the ideas and be like, okay, listen, I see what you're doing here. Have you considered this, this, and this? If you look at these different types of moons, maybe it applies differently, or have you considered that on frigates, it wouldn't fit the same way, like that kind of thing. Spell it all out. And that's basically what Confluence is for, to be used as a more serious tool for serious discussion. So beyond Confluence, the next thing that's the most common, I guess, is going to be the dial-in meetings. So kind of pretty much weekly, sometimes more than once a week. Sometimes weekly meeting is skipped. There are phone-in sessions over Skype. I guess it's technically Microsoft Link, but I believe Microsoft Link and Skype are being combined. I wouldn't be surprised because Microsoft's been trying to, we got a lot of speed bumps here. Microsoft's been trying to combine their services lately. Anyway, the whole point is this is like a dial-in teleconference thing once a week or so, which can be one of two things. One is just a general touch base. So every week there's generally a CSM meeting where we just talk with CCP Lilu and anyone else who's on the team at CCP that makes sense, to just say, hey, here are some things we talked about this week. Here's some concerns the CSM have. Here are some requests the CSM have. So maybe somebody will say, hey, you touched on this really fast about HiSec. I'd really like to know more details about HiSec, or I have specific concerns. Is it possible, can we schedule something to discuss about HiSec? And then if that happens, usually what would there be, hopefully there'd be some kind of meeting, a secondary meeting scheduled maybe the following week or 2 weeks from there, where they get the relevant developers into, again, a Link or Skype chat to talk about these things over voice and just flesh them out. Now, I will say that the meetings in general, sometimes they're productive, but I think the CSM has, I've seen some issues in the CSM where we've just been concerned that it's been hard to get some of the meetings that we've asked for. And I'm definitely not even going to pretend like I'm the one necessarily asking for them. Like, I'm definitely haven't been the person requesting the most meetings, partly because it just took me a little bit longer to get used to like how the CSM functions, where some of the incumbent people, like, they're already in this flow, they already know what to ask or who to go to for this stuff. But it's still, it's still something like, we'd really like to see this be a little bit smoother, that CCP could be more responsive sometimes to some of the requests. And I understand that's not easy because they all have their own workload, they have their own internal schedules, they have work to do, they're at their offices ostensibly with their bosses deciding whether or not they're doing a good job. So, they can't spend all day having meetings with the CSM, but at the same time there have been serious, concerns, whether it's about changes to the game or even about some, the way the interplay, that some things hashed out between the CSM and CCP, or maybe even just like working out some things with communications, like, hey, we're having this issue with Confluence, or we're having this issue with Slack, or whatever it is, or can you get this team of developers on Slack because we've seen these guys, we haven't seen these guys, or blah blah blah. That stuff just has to get worked out, and that's definitely sometimes a point of discussion. So of course, the last big way that CCP and the CSM talk is at those summits, which are twice a year. Unfortunately, I will not be able to go to the summer summit, which is going to actually be kind of late in the summer, early fall, primarily just for personal reasons. I have some business trips. My wife has some business trips. We have like 2 weddings in that same week, so it's really, unfortunately, not going to be able to go in person. Hopefully going to be able to review everything either remotely or review it and then put in my notes for review the next day as much as possible. So I haven't been to a summit. It's very difficult then for me to say what percentage of importance this takes up as far as CSM and CCP communications go, but certainly it's a big deal, and it's very public. And I think what it does for both sides is it puts human faces to things. And I think it's very easy, especially early on, for someone like me to get wrapped up in here's all the CCP people, and they have their screen names, and I guess, we have their real names and all that stuff too. And here's all these other CSM people, and they're just a bunch of, Eve avatars, but they're all real people, and they have, I think it's very easy to dismiss people as, oh, this suggestion is stupid, or how come this person can't understand this? What a moron, or I can't believe they're going to make this change. Didn't they listen to me? I think that's easy to say, but then meeting people in real life is important too, because it reminds you these people, CCP and CSM, are real people. They have jobs, and they have passions, and they have feelings, and it's not just text on a screen. Like, a lot of these people, even if you don't agree with them, or they're not doing the things that you would want them to do, or saying the things you want them to say, it's important to remember, just like the people that you work with, or people in your family, or whoever it is, that just because someone disagrees with you or sees things a different way, doesn't mean they're an asshole. Now, they could be a huge asshole. They definitely could be a huge asshole. But I think it's important to give people human courtesy, and to just keep that stuff in mind. So, unfortunately, I can't go to the earlier summit. I'm hoping to go to the winter summit, because my winter schedule is pretty clear right now. I haven't really planned anything out. But yeah, and now that would just be a really good opportunity. So, having talked a little bit about the interplay between CCP and the CSM, and by the way, there is a CPM, the Council of Planetary Management, which represents Dust players, Dust 514 players, that also deals with CCP. So I didn't actually know that when I was running for CSM. It's actually pretty new. I believe they're on their second CPM right now, or is it their first CPM? But they have CPM 1 or 0. I don't. Anyway, we've talked to them before, but that's not like a daily thing or anything like that. Seem like really nice people, those Dust Mercs. But what I wanted to get to was just the idea of, I think what I've seen on the forums and on Reddit and in some other places, the sense of like, what the fuck is the CSM even doing? Like, do they even do anything? Because I think sometimes the public sees some changes that CCP makes or proposes, and they kind of assume like these changes are bad, therefore the CSM failed. And first of all, I want to tell you guys, everyone who's listening, that I wasn't like skeptical going into the CSM, because it wasn't like I was running on some protest platform to fuck the CSM like some people. But I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know, I saw CSM 9, there was a lot of contention about people being active, or CSM members not doing anything, or just being in it to be space famous or something like that. And I'll say right now, and I'm not just saying this, that like I can say with 90% like coverage, that the CSM, this CSM 10, CSM X, whatever, is very hardworking. The people on the CSM are like showing up all the time, sharing their ideas, representing their groups, and in general doing what if I weren't on the CSM, in my head, like what I would hope that the people I voted for would do. Like, I would say easily, like no doubt 12 out of the 14 people just like bam, doing that like 100%. Because every single day I go on, it's not like CCP posts these things and then like no one responds. Like pretty much everyone responds, and I'm talking like every day. Like, this is a big thing. And I know in the past CCP Lilu has said that she wanted to make some kind of stats available on CSM participation, because even she recognized that to the general public it may look like, okay, there's just the summit notes and that's it. And if you're not on the summit notes, if you're on the summit notes, you're a good CSM, and if you're not on the summit notes, you're a bad CSM. It's not really like that, because there are the weekly calls, there's the daily chats on Slack, there's the emailing people and getting on, Skype or whatever, Confluence. And, again, the summits are only 2 times a year for like a week, and the rest of the CSM work is literally every day of the year. Except, not as much on the weekends because the CCP offices are closed. But the point is, the CSM is in my opinion, doing a great job. And when I say great job, I mean in the general sense of representing their player bases. Now, does that mean that I agree with what some of these people either represent, or what their player bases represent, or the changes that they would want to make to EVE? Of course not. And there's been a lot of debate. There's been a lot of back and forth. I think on the CSM watch, that Cap Stable was doing, they asked about bullying on the CSM. And I kind of wavered on that, and I was really caught off guard by some of the questions that were in that podcast because I felt like they were aimed at me, and one of them was specifically aimed at me. But the bullying thing was definitely aimed at me because early on in the term, there was a lot of, I'm not gonna lie, there was a lot of antagonism directly towards me as a person in the CSM. Now I think part of that is just due to maybe in the past, some of the people who were like media personalities on the CSM were viewed negatively. And I don't even mean viewed negatively by the whole of EVE, but viewed negatively by the other members of the CSM. I think that those people have some prejudice in that regard, like, oh, this person makes YouTube videos or is a blogger or whatever it is. Therefore, they're not here to do anything constructive. They're just here to get their name on I'm a CSM member and be famous. So I think that was part of it. And I also think that there's just some very big philosophical differences that I have about how I enjoy playing EVE and how I think a lot of people enjoy playing EVE and what that representation is within EVE Online. So for instance, you know, and this is like part of my platform, like I was very big on the new player experience, and you know, especially for me as a new player, I always viewed like exploration and cloaky stuff as being very accessible to new players because it doesn't require a huge corporation or alliance to do. It doesn't require a huge number of skill points to do. It doesn't require a lot of knowledge of EVE to be successful at. And all that stuff to me was like very interesting. So I kind of view EVE through that lens, and the fact that, you know, there's now been like 6,000 downloads of my book, and you know, my EVE videos have like tens or hundreds of thousands of views, and I get emails every day from people saying, I joined EVE because I want to do the stuff that you showed me how to do with exploration or stealth bombing, and I got my friends into EVE because I showed them your videos, or I read your exploration guide, or whatever. For me, it's very difficult to then hear feedback from people on the CSM saying like, new players don't come to EVE, or nobody would play EVE unless, you know, they have this certain approach to it. It's very discouraging, and to me that kind of has this bitter vet feel, and I'll go into like a big rant and how it's not true, and players just need to see what kind of opportunities there are. And that's not to say that that there aren't things that need to be fixed in the new player experience, because there's certainly lots of things that need to be fixed. But I guess what I'm getting at is that early on there was some friction between, I guess, people who, I guess, me and a couple other CSM members who have a generally optimistic viewpoint of, you know, there's not a general huge cancerous problem with EVE as far as like the whole game goes, and that there are things for new players to do, and that we can get new players with the right kind of like marketing and the right couple changes to new player experience. And then there's other people who believe EVE is dying, EVE is doomed, CCP is, you know, doesn't know what they're doing, they're gonna bury the game, blah, 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 blah. I fundamentally don't believe those things, and then people were kind of like telling, you know, they were directly saying to me like, oh, you're a marketer, what does a marketer know about this kind of stuff? Marketer, you can't market your way to having a good game, like that kind of thing. So there was that little back and forth early on, and I think we've kind of reached a point where everyone's kind of felt each other's boundaries out a little bit, so I don't really see that anymore. That was also, I was going to say before, an additional channel that we have for communication is private channels. So of course the CSM members individually, you know, we have each other on Skype, and you know, people, there's always EVE mail and email and things like that. So it's not like we don't have offshoot side conversations with each other or as a group or anything like that, because there's things that we would want to say to each other, you know, that we don't want to say to CCP necessarily, or we may want to talk to each other and be like, hey guys, I'm feeling this, are you feeling this too? If a couple of you agree, then I'll say it to CCP, and if not, then I won't say it. So there's that feeling too, and of course, you know, there's always just complaining about stuff, or just be like, hey, did you see what you know, this dev said? It kind of made me upset. What do you guys think? And then we'll talk about it and share it. So now that we've kind of like hashed out our boundaries, everyone knows generally what other people's philosophies are, how they feel. I feel like things have gotten a lot more constructive. So going back to the point about like what does the CSM do? Like, oh, I saw some bad changes. Like, do you guys actually do anything? I guess the one thing to keep in mind, there's just two things to keep in mind. One is that not everything comes to the CSM, which is kind of like sad sometimes. There's a lot of things that CCP does, whether due to their workflow or, you know, there's specific devs that like love bringing stuff to CSM, like CCP, Rise, or Fozzie will talk to the CSM a lot. There's a lot of people on the art team who like to show off the skins and things like that. There's a lot of people who work very closely with us, and there's also people on CCP who just don't interact with the CSM as much. So there's some things that will go out, whether it's on the forums or wherever it's going out, that we just don't see, which is unfortunate, because it's not unfortunate, like I'm not saying that like selfishly, like, oh, I want to see all the secret stuff, but I think part of it is also just the sense of, you know, sometimes there's community concerns or backlash, and if CCP did bring that to the CSM first, they could have anticipated it more, that's kind of the point of why the CSM exists. So when things don't get brought to the CSM, it's unfortunate in the sense that it's a missed opportunity that which is, you know, like, duh, why wasn't this done? The other thing to keep in mind, the second thing, is that a lot of times where things land is in the middle ground of certain things. So let's look at something like skin pricing, okay? Skin pricing is something that's very sensitive and something that a lot of people had objections to. And that's something that's very, very difficult to be in like the perfect place on, right? Because when CCP came to the CSM and said, what do you guys think about skin pricing? Okay, here's they throw some general numbers around. Everyone shares some of their ideas. Like, just like anything else in life, like if someone said, how much should a car cost, right? Like if you just went to the average person and said, how much should a car cost? Or you put it on some forum, like, how much would you pay for a car? Well, I'm sure everyone, if they could have the choice, would just say, I would want a car to cost $12. I would like my car to cost $15, right? Everyone would want it to be as cheap as possible. But of course, the car manufacturers have their own business goals and their own goals to meet and their own ideas about what a car should cost. Now, if you get outside of the ridiculous, like the super low ball stuff, it's completely subjective, right? If you ask someone, how much should a car cost? Well, for instance, when I bought this car, it was $18,000. So for me, that was a reasonable amount of money for a car. But there's certainly people out there who would never buy a new car, even if it's a low-end coupe like this, like a Scion TC is a low-end coupe, generally speaking, because even that is too expensive. Like they'd say, oh man, I would buy a secondhand car, I would buy like a 5-year-old, I would buy a car, there's no way I would spend more than $12,000 or even more than $10,000 if I could avoid it. I would drive into the ground for 20 years straight, that's what I would do. And then there's other people who would say like, how could you, like, $18,000, I like make $18,000 in a week, that's like chump change to me, in my opinion. You know, every car I bought in the past is $60,000. Like, I own 8 Teslas. Like, this is a joke. So there's no like good answer for that. And you see people saying like, how much should a skin for a Titan cost? And some people are like, oh, well, it should cost the same as the rest of the skins because it doesn't cost CCP more to make it. Other people are like, oh, well, it should feel special and exclusive, so it should cost way more. And other people say, hey, it could cost like thousands of dollars to buy a Titan with real money. Shouldn't a skin cost a lot of money? Like, so there's a lot of back and forth, and these things don't necessarily have like easy, if there were easy solutions, they would have just been implemented like years ago. Like these things can't, basically what I'm saying is I don't think it's fair to say, how did this happen? Like CCP and CSM should have just figured it out, because CCP has their ideas, CSM has their concerns from all different player groups, new players, veteran players, you know, low sec, wormhole space, high sec, null sec, and there's no good answer. And like one thing that I kept bringing up about skins was like, you know, people are talking about the price and like, oh, this skin is $20. I'm like, it's $20, but you can buy it with in-game money, you know, and they're like, oh, well, you buy with Aurum. I'm like, yes, but you can convert ISK to Plex, convert Plex to Aurum, and then buy it with the Aurum. So you really, like, when people are saying, why should I pay $20? Like, you can pay $20, or you can trade for it from someone, you know, in the game, or you can buy it with Aurum you already have, or you can convert your Plex to Aurum, or you can get ISK and buy Plex. And like, that's something that I think everyone should keep in mind when it comes to skins, because in a lot of other games of microtransactions, they'll be like, oh, well, it requires $2 to buy the skin, but in some of those games, you can't buy the skin with in-game currency. Like, I've played a lot of mobile phone games where, you know, the cosmetic add-ons and DLC are the things you can't buy with in-game currency. You have to buy them in real money. So the fact that that exists in EVE, to me, tempers it a little bit. I understand that, you know, it goes back and forth, and I also understand that CCP, it's always easier to lower prices. You can never raise prices. So, and that's just like a general like e-commerce businessy strategy thing, is like, okay, well, if we start these off at the equivalent of $10, if we find that they're selling great, that's great. If they're not, we can lower the price. If we're not sure, we can test certain ones by lowering the price still, like put a temporary sale, 75% off this one. If people still don't buy it, then maybe people don't even want this skin to begin with. Or if we see the ISK values for those skins dropping in the market, then that will be like a bellwether to know that we can drop the actual price of the skin in Aurum, because that means people don't really like this skin, or a lot of people have it and there's less demand, or whatever they want to do. So it's just something to keep in mind. So, and there's other topics too, where something like fleet warping. People are very upset about fleet warping. Like I said before, I thought it was addressing, you know, just the approach that was being taken or proposed at a certain point was very broad, and I thought it should be more like scalpel, laser-like. But, you know, people are like, how could this happen? Well, again, just to keep in mind that the initial proposals about fleet warp were nothing like, you know, what was eventually shown, and even that is not necessarily like this final, this is exactly how it's going to be implemented kind of thing. So the initial proposal will be brought to CSM, and I'll have my objection, and Sugar Kyle will have her objections, and Thoric Frosthammer will have his objections, and we'll like talk all that out, right? And we'll say, okay, well, these are the parts about this I like, and here's what I don't like, and here's what my player base has said to me in the past of what their problem is with, say, bombing runs, or with, you know, on-grid probing or things like that. And where those things ends up when they go to the public is in a lot of ways a CCP, you know, going from they start at A, then they talk to us, and we're B, and then they go back and make their revisions C based on what we said. Now, but there's no way that C is going to be the best optimal thing, because the C is more like, okay, well, we've tried to address some of the preliminary concerns from the CSM, the top level stuff, but they still have their own plan, and they still want to solicit additional feedback from the community. So when these things are posted on the forums, posted on Reddit, posted on YouTube or whatever it is, they're still at the stage of like, they're not being posted just for fun. Like, they're posting on the forums because they want people to comment and share their comments. So yes, a lot of the stuff that will be said in the comments is stuff that the CSM has already said, which is great, because that shows that we know what we're talking about. In some ways it's frustrating, because it's like, see, we told you people will be mad about this, this, and this. Which, you know, is great for our egos, but hopefully also lends some credence to the fact that, you know, whether or not the whole CSM understands every single topic, several people on any given topic will understand important things about how the community will perceive it. And of course, I think the final thing to keep in mind is that there are some things that CCP needs to do in the game that will be unpopular or will not reflect what the player base wants as like a democratic institution. So what I mean by that is that just because the CSM says that they want something, right, or just because the general public says they want something, doesn't mean that it's something CCP can or should do. And there are certain things that, I mean, I'm not trying to use that as a blanket statement. I don't believe that's like an overriding principle, but there are always going to be things that can't be bent or can't be pushed a certain way, just because ultimately it's their business. They have a business to run, they have income to keep, they have bosses and inner management, things like that, where they're getting direction. So, you know, they might have Seagull or someone else coming down to them being like, hey guys, I want you to accomplish this. Okay, now CSM comes to them and says, don't do that. Well, are they going to listen to us, or are they going to listen to their boss? I don't know. All I know is that my boss told me you need to accomplish this, and then one of my customers told me, you know, some concern they had about it. I might take it into consideration. I might bring it to my boss, but ultimately, you know, like, my job is on the line and our product is on the line. It's just something to keep in mind. So I know it went on forever, but I just want to get some of my general thoughts out there to try to explain how the CSM works, at least how it currently works in my view. And again, I'm just one of 14 people on the council. The way that the communication goes back and forth, how that dynamic interplays between CSM members and also with CCP, and why some of the things that you see end up where they are. So I hope this has been helpful. If you guys, if anyone watching this is interested in, you know, more specific discussions about specific CSM topics, I'm glad to do it. If there are any questions that you have about the CSM, feel free to share them with me. And when I say that, I mean, you can leave a comment below in the comments in YouTube, but also if you want to, you know, contact me on Twitter or in-game via email at Chance Ravine or anything like that, I'm certainly always listening, and the rest of CSM is listening. The emails and tweets and stuff like that get posted, the stuff that gets posted on Reddit that says Dear CSM or whatever, that stuff gets read. We do look at it. Even if we don't always reply, sometimes we can't reply because we don't have a good answer. Oh, well, why does CCP do this? Well, the reason is we don't know yet, and we're going to look into it. Or why does CCP do this? Well, the reason is something that is going to be happening a couple months from now in the game, and we can't say what it is. Or maybe it's just a matter of just getting back in time and just being swamped. But that stuff does get looked at. So please let me know, let the rest of CSM know, let your elected officials know, because we are listening. We are doing our damnedest best job to make your concerns and your hopes and dreams known to CCP, and we hope that we're doing a good job. And I know the rest of CSM will say, don't speak for the CSM, don't speak for CSM. Okay, well, I'm just going to say that I believe the CSM would like everyone to know that we're trying our best, and we're doing our best to represent our voters. So if that comment is a problem, then I guess I'll get crucified on Twitter. But hopefully that's broad and positive enough that no one takes issue with that. Well, everyone, I'm Wingspan TT, the 4th best commentator on YouTube, and I also believe I was the 4th highest voted person on the CSM. I hope this has been helpful, and thank you very much for watching. Cheers.